Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Elle, and this is Elle's Reptiles. This week, we are doing a video very similar to the one we did a couple weeks ago with the Bearded Dragon shopping list, and as suggested by one of you guys, we are doing a Bioactive setup shopping list. I've never done one of these before. Usually I build Bioactive tanks and I just kind of quickly go through what you need as I build it, but this time we're actually going to go through an entire shopping list. We're not going to go over prices with this just because everyone lives in different places and prices are going to be different depending on when you watch this, where you watch this, where you buy things. So we're just going to go over the list itself. Yeah, but before we get started, this video is sponsored by the Dubia Dude, so make sure to stay until the end of the video to find out all about this awesome company and how you can save 10% off of your entire order with them. Let's get started. So the very first thing that you need is going to be a tank. Obviously, you're going to need somewhere to put this Bioactive setup in. This is, of course, going to vary greatly depending on what kind of animal you are building this Bioactive tank for. You can do this in a glass tank, a front opening tank, PVC, wood that has like some sort of like pond sealer or something on it. You can do this in virtually whatever kind of tank you want to do this in. Next up is setting up the background. This is completely optional. You do not have to have a background in your Bioactive tank. If you don't care about this part, the timestamps, as always, will be in the description, and the little chapters at the bottom of this video will also be marked. But for the background, you can do this multiple different ways. You can get one from the store, Petco, PetSmart, online stores sell backgrounds. You can get them from Josh's Frogs, cork backgrounds, or Universal Rocks backgrounds are really cool. You can just go out and buy one and then use silicone to seal it in place and you're good to go. You can also make one at home. You can do dry lock backgrounds. You can do the Gorilla Glue method that Clint's Reptiles likes to use. The method that we use is expanding foam and black silicone and cocoa fiber smushed into there. There are a lot of different methods doing this, and the best thing here is just to decide what you want it to look like and go for a method that's going to work best for that style. Next up, you're going to need some sort of drainage layer. This can also be made with lots of different things. For a very long time, I always just used pebbles for my drainage layers. You can also use things like clay balls. That's what I'm currently using, hydro balls. In most of my tanks, Josh's Frogs makes a false bottom drainage layer. You can also use egg crates. This is a method that Server Design uses often. You just need something to elevate the substrate off of the ground. This is important because it's going to allow for better air circulation in your soil, which is going to help to prevent mold growth. It also is going to keep the water from just sitting in the soil and just becoming mud, because plants don't like that. That does cause root rot. If you're doing an arid tank, you don't necessarily need a drainage layer. I put one in mine just to make sure that water isn't going to ever sit in the roots of my succulents, but you can put one in if you want. Next up, a substrate barrier. This is only obviously going to apply if you used a drainage layer, but what this does is it's going to prevent the substrate from leaking down into that drainage layer. This can be done with a specified substrate barrier like the one from Josh's Frogs. This is one I've been using a lot. You can also just use window screen. This is very inexpensive. You get a huge roll for less than $5. You can also use weed block. Basically anything that you can put on the bottom that is animal safe and that the water can drain through, but it will keep soil at the top. That's what you want to use for a substrate barrier. Now for the soil, this is one that depends again on what kind of animal you're building for. Just a generalization here, you can do this in so many different ways, but just a generalization. For a more humid environment, you might want to use something like a organic topsoil that doesn't have any kind of manures or pesticides or anything like that in it, and mix it with maybe a little bit of sand just to help it keep its shape, and then mix that with some kind of woody substance so that the plants have something to hold on to and that there's something to break down in the soil, like orchid bark or cypress mulch. You may even throw in some ground up moss. Reptisoil, I think, is a fantastic addition to the more humid substrates just because it is made to grow plants. You just want some sort of nutritious substrate for your plants. Or for an arid substrate, you may do a play sand mixed with topsoil, mixed with a little bit of loose excavator clay, some sort of sandy substance that isn't just straight sand that also has nutrients for those plants that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. If you don't want to make your own soil, you can also do store-bought bioactive substrates. The Biodude makes a bunch of amazing ones. Lugardi makes one that I've used that I really like. If you are not in the United States, Arcadia makes fantastic arid and humidity loving substrates. Josh's Frogs has their own line of both arid and humidity loving substrates for animals. They also have something called ABG Mix. There's a lot of different options out there, whether you want to make your own or just store buy it. And an optional thing that you don't have to put in your bioactive tank, and I never did until very recently, and that is Bioshot by the Biodude. This basically just adds a bunch of organic material into the soil to kind of kickstart that bioactive lifespan of the tank. It works fantastically. The tanks that I've used that in are doing very well. The plants do very well. Super inexpensive. It is optional though. I've done multiple tanks without it, so you don't have to use it, but now that I have used it, I probably won't ever not use it again. Next, let's talk about the cleanup crew. This is kind of one of the most important parts of a bioactive tank. A bioactive tank is not just soil and plants. It has to have biological activity going on in the tank that is basically a small little ecosystem. You need some sort of cleanup crew in this tank to break down your animal's waste, to break down plant waste, and basically turn that into fertilizer for the plants and rotate your soil, and it's a whole little ecosystem. For the cleanup crew, lots of different options here. Again, the number one thing that people usually use is springtails. Springtails are usually for more humid environments, but I think that there are springtails for more arid environments too. Springtails are just little mildew and mold destroyers. Another very popular addition to a cleanup crew is isopods. Isopods, they're going to eat any kind of decaying wood or anything like that in the tank, and again, they're going to turn that soil and fertilize your plants. These are awesome because they come in so many different colors, so many different species, and you can have fun with these. And with isopods, there are arid isopods and humid isopods, so you have lots of options there as well. You also have more unconventional options, I guess, and those are things like earthworms, mealworm, and mealworm beetles. Just research into cleanup crews for your specific sort of setup, and there's lots of options. Another optional thing for the cleanup crew, which I highly recommend, is a place to breed your cleanup crew. So if you know you're getting one bioactive tank and that's it, then you don't have to do this. If you think that you might want more bioactive tanks in the future, then I highly suggest getting containers to breed your cleanup crew. So for springtails, all you need is a Tupperware. I like to take the Tupperware, fill it halfway with broken up charcoal. You can break it up, just make sure to clean it really good after you do that. You can buy charcoal that's broken up and put it in there. Fill that about halfway of water. I like to use Josh's Frogs Spring to Life to sprinkle on top, or you can just use like little pieces of rice to basically force mold and mildew to grow, and then the springtails will have something to eat, and then just from that, they're gonna breed like crazy. You also, with isopods, can keep those. I like to use the Tupperware shoebox things and just put a soil in there and leaf litter and driftwood and moss and keep one side pretty moist and keep one side dry and spray it down every now and then. You can throw pieces of veggies, fruits in there. Your animal's shed you can throw in there, and the isopods will break all that down and eat it, and they'll breed that way. That way you have an endless supply of cleanup crew that you can always use. And then on top of all that, in a humid bioactive setup, you're going to need moss, and moss is going to keep that soil moist and keep moisture around your plants, and also provide a bit of a hiding area for your cleanup crew so that your animal isn't eating all of them. You're also gonna put leaf litter in there. It does the same thing. It's gonna hold that humidity down. Also, if you have like dart frogs, things like that, it's gonna give them a dry place to hang out on instead of just being in that wet soil. And it is going to break down in the soil and provide food for your isopods. And you can also get little seed pods and things like that to go into the tank. They look very cute, they look very foresty, and they can potentially be broken down by your cleanup crew just like they would in the wild. You also will need hardscaping items, especially if you build your own background. You might want to put some of these in the background. These are gonna be items like driftwoods and hides and rocks and things like that. Things that are really gonna make your tank look like a small piece of a forest, or areas for your animal to hide in. This is 100% up to you. It's whatever you want your tank to look like. Next, we have plants. I feel like plants are many people's favorite parts of the Bioactive setup, just because this is another thing that you have so many different options for. You can go so many different ways with all of it. If you're doing a more humidity loving area, you're going to want plants that like humidity. You'll probably want to look into things like pothos and philodendron, which honestly, those are just very hardy plants for a lot of different situations. Things like mosses are going to be fantastic in higher humidity tanks. Aluminum plants are really cool. They're one of my favorites. And on the other side of that, for more arid bioactive tanks, you have things like aloe vera, just succulents in general, air plants. Make sure that if you are using plants in a tank that has a reptile that eats plants, that they are all safe for consumption. I'll put a link down below that lists a whole bunch of plants and whether or not they're safe for animals or not. And also keep in mind too, if your reptile eats bugs, don't put a plant in the tank that is toxic to the bugs, because if a cricket goes and starts eating this plant over here and then it's toxic and then your animal eats that animal could potentially get sick. So make sure that you are using only non-toxic plants in these tanks. Also, a very important part of these tanks are going to be the lights. Even if your specific animal doesn't need lights, your plants are going to need lights. If you are setting up an arid tank for leopard gecko and you are putting an Arcadia UVB light on top, that might be enough light to grow those succulents. But if you are doing something for an animal like, I don't know, a cave gecko that never comes out, that doesn't need UV light, you can also just get grow lights to go on top. I will link everything I talk about down below, but there are some very inexpensive grow lights that I like to use that work so well. You can also just use LED lights. LED lights that are bright enough. They do have to be pretty bright. They can't just be dim lights. Josh's Frogs, again, makes specific grow lights. The Bio Dude, I think, has specific growing lights for plants. There are UVB hoods that have built-in LED strips to grow plants by Reptisun. There are a lot of options for lights here, but just know that you are going to need lights on that tank. And then just for a couple of miscellaneous things that you may need. Number one, a spray bottle. I like to spray down the leaves of my plants. I know it doesn't do all that much, but I like to spray it down so that my animals like crested geckos and stuff can just drink water off of the leaves. Another thing that you may need is a mister. Some animals are going to need a super high humidity and will need a mister for that tank, which also is going to be very helpful for keeping the humidity up in the tank for plants if you have high humidity needing plants. Some sort of glass cleaner. Bioactive is fantastic because most of the waste gets broken down, but the cleanup crew is not going to climb the walls and clean the poop off the side of the tank when your animal inevitably does that. Humidity gauges, I mean, that's just kind of in a shopping list for the animal themselves. Humidity gauges, temperature gauges. But that is it. That is all that I have for this setup video, shopping list video. As always, I probably forgot a lot. So put in the comments down below things that I forgot on this list so you can help other people reading those comments out. As I said at the beginning of this video is sponsored by the Doobie Dude. The Doobie Dude is a fantastic place to get dubia roaches for your reptiles. Dubia roaches are awesome. Still my favorite feeder to feed to my reptiles. They are so much better than crickets. I have an escaped cricket on my wall above me that you can't see, and he's been up there for a minute. And I just don't like crickets. Crickets are not as healthy as dubia roaches. They're not as filling as dubia roaches. You have to feed your reptiles more crickets versus dubia roaches to actually fill them up. And crickets are noisy and they smell bad. And I just don't like crickets. But dubia roaches are my favorite feeder for reptiles. And the Doobie Dude's website is awesome because you can set up subscriptions, which is super cool. So that way you don't have to actually think about ordering roaches every month or 2 months or however often you need them. Make sure to use my code Elle at thedubiedude.com to save 10% off of your entire order. Thank you so much to the Doobie Dude for continuing to sponsor these videos into the new year. As always, if you have not already, please feel free to follow me on my other socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is every Sunday and some Wednesdays. Make sure you have that bell turned on because we're going to be building a reptile room in the coming months, and there's going to be a lot of videos about that reptile room. Us building it, moving all the animals in there, redoing tanks to go in there, behind the scenes videos. There's going to be a lot of videos about the reptile room, so make sure that you have the bell turned on so you know when that happens. This week's Instagram shoutout is for Hood Hippie Pythons 2.0 for following me on Instagram and going through and liking a whole bunch of my stuff. And this week's subscriber shoutout is for Melissa Michael for commenting on last week's video. Thank you guys both so much for commenting and subscribing and following and all that jazz. You are the bee's knees. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Again, for this, I like to use Substrate Barrier just because Again, if I use, just to add and provide, just to add another layer to prevent it from, just to add, for the most part, you want to have some high, for the most part, just a general, next let's things like the, you are using plants in a tank. Those aren't, that's not even my dog. It's not even my dog, it's my neighbor's dog.